Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. In the previous podcast I talked about an incredible case from January of 1978 that happened in Montvale, New Jersey, involving some young boys who saw a weird craft landing in a park and weird creatures walking around, and very strange story. And actually, one of my followers on YouTube has indicated to me that he actually knew two of the people that saw the two brothers who were part of this incident, and he's trying to see if he could find out if they're still around. He's looking into whether or not he could contact them. That would be great, because I would love to interview these some of these witnesses for that case, if possible. So I'm looking forward to see if anything comes up with that. In fact, I'm going to do my own little research on it too, as to see if I can find out if any of these people are still around. I'd love to interview them and get their thoughts on that incident all these years later now, especially since pretty much the government is now telling us that UFOs are real and they don't really have answers for some of them. So maybe they won't be too afraid to go on the record again to talk about this, but because obviously back in 1978, after this incident happened, they were ridiculed by some people. But anyway, there was another case I want to talk about today that also happened in January of 1978. It happened at sometime in late January of 1978. We're not exactly sure of the exact date, but I've seen the January 27th, January 24th, but whatever the case, it was sometime in late January of 1978, except this incident happened in England, in Cheshire, and it involved four teenagers. This has involved four teenage boys, like 18, 17, 18, 19 years old, who were on some private property, and they were poaching. They were going after some pheasant, and they shouldn't have been there, but they were there, and they probably later wished that they didn't go there, because they actually saw a weird craft in the sky that actually came down to the ground and landed. Two humanoids emerged from this craft and basically went over to a cow with some sort of device that they thought looked like something like a cage, but it wasn't. It seemed like they were using this device to measure the cow. The boys got really scared. They thought, if they're going to go after these cows, we're probably going to be next. And they got out of there quick. But as they were running away, they were feeling a force trying to hold them there. But particularly the last kid in line, the last kid in the back of the pack running away, felt something pulling on him, and he actually had physical effects from this. And so anyway, we're going to talk about that case. Now, I've been reading about this in a several different articles, and also in a book from Jenny Randall's Alien Contacts and Abductions. It was talked about in here. I'll read a little bit from this publication, and it says it happened in Devil's Garden. It sits by the banks of the River Weaver in rural Cheshire. It's an evocative place to fish. But these kids weren't there fishing that day. They're there to do some poaching of pheasants. It says here, for four youths in late January 1978, this was part of the thrill, as was the fact that they were poaching on land where they had no right to be. Alert to any noise or movement in the bushes, they pursued their quest on a cool and cloudy night. What the men aged between 17 and 19 were not to know was that they were about to become the prey of hunters who were distinctly not of this world. Now, the first names are listed here in this article, but we read. I don't know if these are the real first names of the people or not, but it says here, Jim glanced skyward expecting to see a meteor which had caught his eye, but instead he saw an object that fell from the air in silent and unremarkable descent. He nudged his friend Bill, whose father was a local state official, and so was more than wary of being mixed up in this daring venture. What is it, he asked. I don't know. A satellite, maybe, came the reply. It was true that just a few days before, a Soviet space probe had crashed to Earth, scattering radioactive debris over the Canadian snows. Luckily, nobody was injured, but the newspapers had remarked that there was a great deal of junk floating in orbit, and that what goes up eventually comes down. Next time, this might not be onto some frozen and uninhabited wasteland or the middle of the sea. It could be somewhere such as the banks of a gently flowing stream rolling through the English countryside. Now, according to a different article here, this is from James Deem, who I was referring to in the previous podcast for a different event. He says here the silver sphere had a flashing light on each side near the top. What appeared to be a row of windows circled it near the middle, emitting a purplish light that was hard to look at. When the object landed in some nearby bushes, the 4 hunters became frightened, not so much by the object as by the possibility of being contaminated by radioactivity from a satellite. Then they saw a figure which looked human and was wearing a silver jumpsuit and helmet. Attached to the top of the helmet was a blinding purple light similar to a miner's lantern. So I never heard that's a new one where they're actually wearing whatever is on their head. They have a light on it like a coal miner would use. It says the young men watched as this creature surveyed the scene and gazed at some cows in an adjacent field. The cows seemed to be entranced by the silvery ball. The figure stepped behind the ball out of sight of the 4 boys and returned seconds later with a companion who was similarly dressed. The 2 figures carried a large cage made of light metal. They walked toward one of the cows and, using the cage-like contraption, appeared to measure it. Yeah, and the different articles that I was looking at with this, that's what it looked like. They weren't using this device as a method to capture the cow. They're using it apparently to measure it or do some sort of examination with it. I mean, who knows what it really was? We don't know. It says here, but by now the hunters were terrified. They feared they might be next on the list if the beings caught sight of them. They turned and ran, not looking back until they were a mile or so downriver. You won't be surprised to learn that they could not see anything more of the mysterious silver sphere or its occupants. But that's not the end of the story. When they were running away, now according to this book from Jenny Randall's, it says here they did not get very far before there was a tingling sensation on their nether regions. Chris, who brought up the rear and was straggling behind, was most aware and most vulnerable. For him, it was as if a red-hot poker had been pushed down his trousers. It was an excruciating and embarrassing pain. He was, needless to say, quite scared to death. By now, the others had reached a bridge that led to the safety of a road, and they hoped to sanctuary. Chris, yanking free of the grinding sensation, had hobbled up behind them and was saying very little through panting breath and muffled groans. None looked behind to see if the beatings were still there. None were concerned about the fate of the cow. All were merely grateful to be out of the devilish place and on their way to somewhere which had very earthly welcoming lights and, most of all, other human beings. And there was some more on this. Basically, it was in the groin area where where Chris, we don't know if that's his real first name or not, was feeling this tugging sensation. But in another publication that I was looking at here, Paranormal Merseyside, it states this. It says, what particularly scared them at the time, however, were not just the silver men, but also a fear that they might contract radiation sickness from the purple glow. Perhaps such fears were not without foundation, as, when they fled, one of the boys began to feel pain and a pulling sensation in his private parts, almost as if some form of invisible suction device had been applied to them. Afterward, he discovered that his private parts were bright red with a kind of severe sunburn type rash, as were his legs, and his groin remained sore and tender for the next few days. So basically, it seemed before they took off, they were looking at this cow. There was several cows there, and the extraterrestrials were apparently interested just in one of them, and that cow was like just standing there, paralyzed, not moving, surprisingly. And it didn't do anything when these 2 beings went near it. And so when these kids go to take off, they're feeling this tugging on them, on their lower section of their bodies. Obviously, these beings are using some sort of technology that paralyzes everything living within a certain range. That's what it seems like, and that's what it looks like here. Now, of course, there's not everything that I've looked at with this story. I can't find anything about anyone later finding this cow mutilated. It could have been. We just don't know. We don't know. I mean, we don't know how long it really took for these 4 youngsters to go tell anyone about this. We know that there were several different UFO investigators that had talked to them, but they did not want to talk about this publicly. and makes you realize that you could understand why they wouldn't. I mean, if they're doing some illegal poaching now, of course you're not going to want to go public with that. And even if you weren't doing anything illegal, you're not going to want to go public with it, most likely, because then you're going to face all sorts of ridicule. But to me, what it goes to show is that obviously what's happening here with these cattle mutilations is that these beings have a way to basically somehow freeze in place, paralyze in place, somehow using some sort of technology, every living creature within a certain area. And that's what it seems like happened here, because even these kids were hiding off in the bush watching all this action unfold. Before they take off, they're seeing all this stuff, and then they go to run away, but there's still something seems like it's gripping onto them. Invisible. They can't see it. So what kind of technology is that? Who knows? But obviously this is what these beings are using when they mutilate cattle, for whatever purpose that is. We don't know what the purpose is. I've speculated on that a billion times on this podcast, but all of it's speculation. But it's still happening today. I mean, we're still having cattle mutilations today. Again, I don't know if there was a cattle mutilated in this case, but I would not be surprised to find out that there was one. I mean, what were they doing with this cow? Obviously, there's been other cases where UFOs are seen, and over a cow pasture, and then the next day there's a mutilated cow. In this case, we have some kids, some teenagers, 17, 18, 19 years old, doing some poaching in an area where they're not supposed to be, and next thing you know, craft shows up. They think it's something else. They think it's a satellite. It's not a satellite. It's shaped like a ball, has lights on it, and two weird short beings come out of it wearing helmets. Now, they couldn't see their faces, but they did see that they were wearing these kind of lights on their heads. And they take some sort of a contraption that looks like a cage over near this cow, and they start like enclosing the animal with this cage. But it didn't, according to these kids, that didn't seem to be the purpose to put it in a cage. It was doing something else, taking some kind of measurements. That's what they felt was happening. And then he took off before they could see the end result, how the whole thing ended. So they don't know. But I would imagine that how it ended was that cow was dead meat pretty quickly. That's my belief. Just like in so many other tens of thousands of other cases. I've done a lot of podcasts over the last 2 years, and I've been talking about cases that have been happening all over the world, actually, in New Zealand, in the United States, different areas out in the Midwest, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, Oregon. Actually, here there's a case here from NPR. This was something from 2019 I want to go through. It says, "Not one drop of blood. Cattle mysteriously mutilated in Oregon." And this is from npr.org. Of course, I'll leave the link. And there's a picture here, which I'm not going to share on here because it's a terrible looking picture, but I would recommend, if you have a chance, to take out this look at this article if you're interested in seeing this picture. But it has a picture of a cow, and it looks like it looks like there's not even any bones left in it. It looks like it's completely sucked dry of everything inside of it. But this cow that they found, this bull, had all of its blood drained out of it, along with 4 other cows in the same area. And they don't know how it happened. I'll tell you right now, we do know how it happened. We do know it's extraterrestrials are responsible for this. I've been saying this for a long time now. That's what it is. I mean, whether they're doing it for food, whether they're doing it for some kind of experimentation, whether they're using it for their hybridization program, using cow blood, it's very close, similar to human blood. Whatever they're doing, right? Whatever they're using it for, that's secondary, really. They are doing this. That's who's responsible. But anyway, it says here, in the early morning light, dust from hooves creates a fog at Sylvie's Valley Ranch in remote eastern Oregon. Cowboys whistle and talk low to their eager herding dogs. They're moving the cattle from one vast sage-studded range to another. 5 young purebred bulls mysteriously showed up dead on the ranch this past summer, drained of blood and with body parts precisely removed. The ranch's vice president, Colby Marshall, drives his truck down a United States Forest Service road. "Then we'll get out and take a little walk and where one of the bulls was found, and the carcass is still there," Marshall says. Coming upon one of the dead bulls is an eerie scene. The forest is hot and still apart from a raven's repeating caw. The bull looks like a giant deflated plush toy. Let me just stop there. Yeah. The picture that you see on here, that's what it looks like. It looks like a giant. That's the best description. This article, by the way, was written by Anna King, and she did a really good job with it, I gotta say. And that really is the description of this picture. It looks like a giant deflated plush toy, and it smells. Weirdly, there are no signs of buzzards, coyotes, or other scavengers. His red coat is as shiny as if he were going to the fair, but he's bloodless and his tongue and genitals have been surgically cut out. Marshall says these young livestock were just reaching their top value as breeding bulls. The animals are worth around $6,000 each, and since these were breeding bulls, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of future calves were lost too. Finding these young Herefords in the remote country can sometimes take the ranch's experienced cowboys days. Ranch staff are now required to ride in pairs and are encouraged to carry arms. It's rugged, Marshall says. I mean, this is the frontier. If some person or persons has the ability to take down a 2,000-pound range bull, it's not inconceivable that they wouldn't have a lot of problems dealing with a 180-pound cowboy. Well, let me just stop there for a second. Now, I know that a lot of people don't want to really face the reality of the situation here. It's not people doing this. It's just not. Nobody's been caught doing this. We've been investigating this since the 1960s, and we're going on 60 years here now since we've been looking into this, and still to this day, no person has been caught mutilating the cattle. Nobody in the whole world. Nobody's been caught. There's no satanic cults, right? There's no predators found that could do anything like this. Nothing. There's nothing. It's extraterrestrials. That's what's going on here. They're the ones doing it for whatever reason. It says here, theories abound. Harney County Sheriff's Deputy Dan Jenkins has been working the cattle cases and has gotten dozens of calls from all over offering tips and suggestions. A lot of people lean toward the aliens, Jenkins says. One caller had told us to look for basically a depression under the carcass because he said that the alien ships will kind of beam the cow up and do whatever they are doing with it. Then they just drop them from a great height. Let me just stop there for a second. Yeah, that's what it does seem like it happens sometimes, of course, as we've talked about a number of times. A lot of these cattle, Linda Moulton Howe will definitely tell you this, a lot of these cattle seem to be dropped from a height because their bones are broken. In addition to having body parts removed by laser precision and having their blood drained completely from their bodies, their bones are broke. And there's no tracks, there's nothing, no footprints, nothing around them. It's not people, it's extraterrestrials. They're doing this somehow. We don't know how or why. We just don't know those answers, but that's what it is. We know that answer. That is the answer. It's extraterrestrials. We have to stop being stupid about this. That's what it is. I mean, there's no other explanation because that is the explanation. It says, Jenkins says the cases have been tough with little evidence and no credible leads. Well, let me say this. There is evidence, though. We've had evidence over decades. There's been multiple reports of people seeing UFOs hovering over these areas, strange black helicopters, which for all we know might be projections, right? Might just be alien spacecraft making themselves look like black helicopters. We just don't know. There's a lot of evidence that points to non-human intelligences being responsible. That's what it is. It says on his whiteboard he has a running list scrawled in green marker with the top theories. What's clear, it isn't bears, wolves, cougars, or poisonous plants, nor were the animals shot. And it also says here the FBI won't confirm or deny that it's looking into the multiple slaughters. I think, let me just stop there. They're not going to confirm or deny anything, but I think that they've given up on this a long time ago. I think the FBI, I think that people in the highest echelons of government understand what's been happening all these years. I think that they know. I think that they know that it's extraterrestrials, and they also know that there's nothing we can do about it, and there's nothing that they can do about it, and it's just going to continue for as long as these extraterrestrials are with us, which, who knows, maybe forever. It says here, 2 years ago and 200 miles south near New Princeton, Oregon, one of Andy Davies' cows was also found cut up and bloodless. She and her husband drove concentric circles around the corpse, but they never found any tracks. And in this dusty country, quote, everything you do leaves tracks, Davies says. Yeah, there you go. More proof to show that it's extraterrestrials. That's what it is. And just like we were just talking about with this story from 1978, where you actually have 4 people who said that they actually saw apparent extraterrestrial creatures. That's what they were. I mean, we don't have craft, circular shaped craft that doesn't make any sound, that could just land in the middle of anywhere and then walk around a cow, and then the cow just stands there, doesn't move. That we don't have that kind of technology. Obviously, this is extraterrestrial. Anybody who says otherwise is fooling themselves and trying to fool you along with them. Anyway, it continues here. It says, back in the 1980s, one of Terry Anderson's mother cows was mysteriously killed overnight. Standing at his ranch near Pendleton, Oregon, Anderson points to the exact spot where he found her on top of a mountain. He remembers his cow lying dead, her udder removed with something razor sharp, and not one drop of blood anywhere, Anderson says. He has never gotten over it. It just left a really strange feeling with me since that day. You can't explain it, Anderson says. And no one else has been able to explain it. Now, let me just say something. Yeah, but I'm explaining it right now. It's extraterrestrials. They're doing this. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. Nothing. The story ends with this. It says here, the Harney County Sheriff's Office continues to field calls on the killings, and Sylvie's Valley Ranch has put up a $25,000 reward for information that could solve the case. Well, maybe I'm going to call up and try to cash in on that $25,000 reward because I'm telling you right now, it's extraterrestrials. I mean, I don't have the end-all evidence. I don't have photographs or video or anything to show you, but that's what it is. I mean, I'm using critical thinking skills that I was born with, and I'm telling you right now, it's extraterrestrials. That's who's responsible. And there's other cases too. I mean, I remember in one of the documentaries from that Linda Moulton Howe had put out. I believe it was an alien harvest. I think it was the second one that she did. I think it was from the early 90s, and there was some people that she was talking to, and there was a husband and wife, and they actually witnessed something themselves. They actually witnessed from a distance alien beings pushing a cow onto some sort of craft that was semi-invisible. That's what it is, because sometimes we do see them. Just like the 1978 case that I was talking about earlier, and then this case that Linda Moulton Howe had detailed in her documentary. This is happening. This is what's going on, and we just need to face it. The extraterrestrials do this, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. You might as well just look at it as predators, because that's what they are. I mean, if there's predators that could sometimes attack cattle and kill them, and these aliens basically are like intelligent predators, more intelligent than us, and they're doing this for whatever reason. We don't know why. We can't say with certainty, but we know one thing. That's one thing that we do know for sure, is that it's really happening. Extraterrestrials are responsible for these cattle mutilations. I'm sure that there's some that there are certain ones for sure that are predators, right? There's no question, right? And there's sometimes maybe a human being is responsible for killing a cow, but when it comes to these specific kind of cases where their blood's completely drained and there's body parts removed with laser precision, right? In those kind of cases, and sometimes they have broken bones, right? In those cases, that's extraterrestrials. That's who's responsible. So I don't know why a lot of people in this world are just not accepting this. We sit around, a lot of ranchers are sitting around scratching their heads like, I don't know what it is. We're trying to figure it out. Sheriff doesn't know what it is. No, we know what it is. It's extraterrestrials. That's what it is. That's the answer. It's time to face up to this already. It's time to stop acting stupid about it. We're smart. We human beings are smarter than this. It's extraterrestrial. Oh, okay. Moving on. I recently received requests from someone to talk about like my favorite books, my favorite UFO books. So I want to talk about what my favorite UFO books are today. But before I get into that, I want to make sure that I let everyone know that I did get around to getting Garrett Graff's UFO, his new book, UFO, The Inside Story of the United States Government Search for Alien Life Here and Out There by Garrett Graff. Garrett Graff, who showed up all of a sudden recently on a lot of mainstream news outlets He seems to me he's an establishment hack based on everything that he's been stating on TV about UFOs. He seems like he basically doesn't think it's extraterrestrial and all that kind of stuff. Anybody who would do the research on this would most certainly would come to the conclusion that it is extraterrestrial. But I did say I did report that I was going to do a review on his book, and once I do complete reading that book, I will do that review. But I am not there yet. But if the book is anything like how Garrett presented himself on TV, the same skeptical viewpoint about the extraterrestrial reality, well, of course, I'm going to have to give it a lousy review. But hey, I don't know. I didn't read the book. I didn't finish the book. I started it, but I didn't finish it yet. So I will provide a review at some point in the future. Now, getting into my favorite books. Now, there's a ton of books. I mean, there's a lot of books I love, but I'll go through some of the. I came up with a list today, and I actually have them piled up here right beside me, and I want to talk about the top 12 books that I have in my collection that I consider probably my favorites. Although there are some that weren't in this top 12 that I wish there was some way I could somehow force them into it, because there's a lot of books that I really enjoy about this subject, but I had to keep it at a certain number, and 12 is where we're going to keep it. But anyway, the first one here is The Allagash Abductions by Raymond Fowler. I really love this book. This was one that I read more than once because I enjoyed it so much. It also had an introduction by Bud Hopkins. This was published in, let's see here, when was it published? 1993. And I really enjoyed this book. And of course, it was about four guys who went camping in the Allagash Mountains in Maine back in 1976, and they were abducted by aliens, and they were forced to be examined by these beings, these strange insect-like looking creatures. I love this book because they didn't even know they had missing time, and they saw a UFO, then they experienced missing time, and it wasn't until a decade later before they all started they realized something else happened, and they all went under hypnosis one by one. And they all told similar stories. An amazing story. I know a lot of you are familiar with this, but if you ever get the chance, and if you haven't already, you should read The Allagash Abductions, because what's great about this case is that there's four witnesses, four people at the same time abducted, and they all go under hypnosis, and they all tell the same story under hypnosis. It's as far as I'm concerned, that serves as evidence, proof of the extraterrestrial presence. I mean, anybody who would read something like that and walk away thinking, "Oh, well, I'm not sure." Well, I don't know what planet you're on. I mean, it's pretty clear cut. Okay, moving on here. Another book that I really like is Top Secret / Magic: Operation Majestic 12 and the United States Government's UFO Cover-Up by the late great Stanton T. Friedman. Of course, Stanton Friedman. I love that guy. I'll tell you, I loved his books. I loved when he was on TV. He was a strong voice in the UFO community. And in this book here, he really makes a strong case for stating that the authenticity of some of those Majestic 12 documents that were leaked to different UFO researchers in the 80s and then in the early 90s. And it's, to me, I find it fascinating. See, there's a lot of things like in a book like this, you see documentaries about this subject, about the Majestic 12 documents, but they can never do it justice. No documentary I've ever seen on TV could ever do it justice. This here breaks it all down to show you why some of these documents were actually authentic, and you can't go wrong with it. This is a book I read like 3 times. I love this book. Okay, moving on. Now, this is a strange book to include into this group, but I have to, because I realized when I thought about this question, it's like I always find myself looking at it. It's actually called The Roswell Report, Case Closed by the United States Air Force. And I got this book for free back in 1997 from the United States Air Force. I was doing an article about the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash, and I contacted the Air Force, and they sent me this. And I always find myself looking through it because to me it's almost like an admission that what happened in Roswell was an extraterrestrial crash, and that they did recover bodies, because the explanations provided by the Air Force are so absurd. It's almost like they're telling you. It's almost like they're winking at you when you look at this. You have to see this book to believe it. It's incredible. It's so funny, actually. This is where they suggested for the first time that what people saw in 1947 were actually these anthropomorphic dummies dropped from high altitudes during tests in other parts of the country from 1953 to 1959. It's absolutely absurd. Basically, mannequins. They're saying people mistook mannequins dropped from high altitudes that landed in the desert that had tags on them that said United States Air Force. They mistook them for little gray beings with giant heads and giant big black almond-shaped eyes and four fingers on their hand. One of the explanations for the beings only having four fingers on their hands, according to the Air Force, is because when these dummies hit the ground, one of the fingers would get knocked off. That was the explanation. It's beyond absurdity, and that's why, to me, it's almost like an admission. It's almost like they admitted the truth in this book, as far as I'm concerned. And I find myself going through it every now and then just because I'm fascinated by how stupid it is, and at the same time, I'm fascinated that they would ever put something out like this and foist something like this onto the American public, and even more fascinated by the fact that the mainstream media, for the most part, just took it like, believed in it like it was gospel. It's amazing to me. So if you ever get a chance, get a copy of the Roswell Report, Case Closed, from the United States Air Force. It's absurd, and it actually serves as proof, as far as I'm concerned, of the extraterrestrial reality. Okay, moving on. Alien Agenda by the late, great Jim Marrs. I love this book. Actually, the first time I read this book, I actually had borrowed it from the library. I eventually bought my own copy. I love this book for a lot of reasons. This is the first time I ever read about or heard about the 1897 Aurora, Texas case was in this book. He actually had pictures of the headstone that was stolen. I love this book. And he goes over everything on here, all kinds of conspiracies with regard to this phenomenon, and it's just a fantastic book. I mean, he covers it all. He talks about Roswell, of course, everything. He goes through the works on it, and there's a humorous way of the way he writes, and which makes this highly entertaining. So I actually, very much recommend Alien Agenda by Jim Marrs. Great book. Of course, here's an oldie but a goodie, Communion by Whitley Strieber. You can't go wrong here. I mean, obviously, Whitley Strieber, he's already a best-selling author at this point in his life when he starts realizing he's being abducted by aliens. So he figures, you know what, I might as well write a book about it. And write a book he does, and it's a fascinating book. It's a book I find myself going back to on a regular occasion, on a regular basis to be fascinated all over again. It just never gets old to me. So Communion is most certainly something you got to check out. Now here's a great book, Flying Saucers from Outer Space by retired Major Donald Kehoe of the Marines. Of course, this was published back in 1953. This was his second book. Fascinating book. Of course, Kehoe at the time he had all kinds of inside contacts, and he was getting all kinds of stuff. And actually, it was in this book where he had written about a top intelligence official had told him, relayed to him his theory that these things are obvious. He thinks that they're actually attempting to colonize the planet, that they came here from a dying world and they could be here to colonize the planet. That's where this theory was laid out initially. But it's interesting because he writes it like it's almost like a biography, what would you call it, a diary. I mean, he's telling you all his conversations with all these different Pentagon insiders. Who this guy tells him that, this person tells him this. It's an amazing piece of work and it's like from the 1953 or early 1950s when he's getting all this information from people within the Pentagon, and basically they wouldn't really give him anything, they wouldn't give him at all, but a lot of them were leaning to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and it's fascinating to read something from that time period written by somebody who had contacts on the inside. So Flying Saucers from Outer Space. And another thing about this book that makes it interesting is that it inspired a big science fiction movie from 1956 called Earth versus the Flying Saucers. That movie, in the beginning, it says it's suggested by Flying Saucers from Outer Space by Donald Kehoe. And basically in that movie, what's happening, these beings are coming here and Washington's trying to do everything to prevent them from colonizing the planet. They're trying to take over the world, basically. And they were inspired by Donald Kehoe's book. Now, of course, that movie is completely outrageous, beyond outrageous, but it's entertaining. But it was inspired by flying saucers from outer space. And if you haven't read that one, yeah, I got that. You can only, I don't know if you can get brand new copies these days. This is an original, but it doesn't have its book jacket anymore. I bought it used online. Okay, here's another great one, and this is by Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Martin. This is Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Of course, the first book written on this was The Interrupted Journey from the 1960s, but this book is even better than that one. This really gets a deeper dive into that whole story, and anybody who would read this book would walk away realizing, yes, there's no question about it, these people encountered extraterrestrials. They were kidnapped by extraterrestrials. They were forcibly brought on board an extraterrestrial craft against their will, and they suffered all kinds of bad dreams because of these experiences. And it all comes out later in hypnosis, and we all know it's a great story. This is the best book out there you can get about that incident. If you're interested in Betty and Barney Hill, check out this book. I'll just say one more thing regarding it. If you're ever interested in a movie, a film version of that, there was a movie from 1975 called The UFO Incident. It was a TV movie, excellent TV movie. That's available on Blu-ray. I think it was released in the past 2 years. Fantastic movie. James Earl Jones, by the way, who everyone knows as Darth Vader, plays Barney in that movie. Fantastic movie. Okay, moving on. The Threat by David M. Jacobs. Now, this book here is fantastic. Of course, I talk about this book a lot on the show. Of course, Jacobs on here in this book says that what's going on is that these beings are here based on all the research, all the people he hypnotizes. Like he's basically working with alien abductees. He comes to the conclusion in this book that they're here to take over the planet. That they're here, that they're using this hybridization program to, I don't know, to install human-like beings among us, and they're here now, and they're going to take over the planet at some point with the praying mantis type looking beings, the ones in charge. That's the conclusions he reaches in this book. But it's a fascinating book. Actually, I bought this book right when it came out. This is from 1998, and I must have read it about 5 times by this point. It's fantastic, and I do refer to it a lot in my podcast. So this is one you want to check out if you already don't have it. Now, there's a lot of good Roswell books out there. A lot of good ones. There's the Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. There's Witness to Roswell. There's a lot of really good books about Roswell, but this one here was my favorite. Roswell, The Ultimate Cold Case Closed by Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt. Fantastic book. I mean, again, like the Majestic 12 stuff, you can't ever get enough, all the information you need from a documentary that you want to get from a documentary. And they're just not good enough. Books really, there's more information in there. There's so many witnesses, so many different people that these guys talk to. It basically tells you that there's no question about it, that there was an alien craft at Roswell. There's just too many witnesses, and once you read a book like this, you're going to realize that, oh my God, if you don't believe it now and you read something like this, you'll believe it when you're done reading. The Air Force has nothing. They never did. They don't have any explanation for what happened there. They're not telling you. They won't give you any explanation. They won't give you any truthful explanation. Their truthful explanation has all of the stuff that they've said over the years has been totally absurd. But when you're hearing from the horse's mouth, from people who are actually there, a lot of first-hand witnesses, a lot of second-hand witnesses, when you're hearing from all these different people, you realize, oh my God, there was a cover-up. People were getting threatened. There was something that crashed here. There were alien bodies, and the Air Force, at the time it wasn't called the Air Force, it was called the Army Air Forces. They were lying at that time, and the Air Force is still lying about it today. The Pentagon has never told us the truth about what happened at Roswell. Okay, moving on. Okay, this is a must-have in your collection is UFO Crash Retrievals, The Complete Investigation by Leonard Stringfield. If you don't have this one, I don't know what you're doing. This is the one. I know it cost $100 online to get a new copy of this, but believe me, it's worth every penny of it, and no other time has it been more important than right now. I mean, David Grush, as we all know, has come out last year, testified about what's going on, about the secret crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs. This guy here really was the one who started talking about this heavy back in the late 1970s, and he put out 7 different reports from the late 1970s to the early 90s. This book here has all those reports. He was talking with a lot of different people, a lot of insiders, doctors who actually did autopsies on alien bodies. It's fantastic. This book is amazing. You'll hear a lot of people on other UFO channels talking about this. You'll hear people like Richard Dolan talking about this a lot, UFO crash retrievals. You'll hear people like Michael Schratt. Michael Schratt's like an expert on this book. That guy talks about it a lot. This is something that you got. If you're really interested in UFO crash retrievals, this is the place to start. It's amazing. I get chills down my spine just thinking about this book. Fantastic. Okay, moving on. I got a giant pile of books on the left side of me now. Okay, my next 2 books, UFOs and the National Security State, Volume 2, and UFOs and the National Security State, Volume 1 by Richard Dolan. Richard Dolan is a historian, and he put these 2 books together, and it basically tells the story of UFOs and the cover-up as far as the United States government is concerned, as far as and other governments too. And it's all these should be textbooks for a UFO class somewhere. That's what they should be, because that's what they are. I mean, they're fantastic books. These are educational books that tells you the history of UFOs and how the government has handled UFOs ever since they started worrying about UFOs back in the 1940s. The first volume, of course, it's a chronology of a cover-up it covers 1941 to 1973, and then the second book, 1973 to 1991. I can't wait till he puts out the third book on this. This is he's come out with a lot of books. These are my 2 favorites from Richard Dolan. He's a historian. He knows what he's talking about. He knows how to do research. He knows how to put it down in books. You can't. I mean, if you're someone in the mainstream media who doesn't understand this subject, start here. Start with these 2 books. Grab yourself a copy of UFO Crash Retrievals and the rest of these books. Give yourself an education. Because you need people out there should really educate themselves. People out there in the media they're the ones who really should be educating themselves, because they're the ones who are showing up on TV or writing articles in newspapers on a regular basis about this topic. And a lot of times I can tell just by reading their stories that they don't know what they're talking about. They really don't. These people spend a lot of time on research, and they put stuff together. It's real. It's fantastic. It's interesting. It's educational. And people who are interested in this subject, these books, the 12 books I just talked about, you should have them in your library, and if you don't already, that's what I got to say about it. Anyway, I want to say thank you all for joining me. Until next time.